Thanks for taking the time to watch my talk today. My name is Clint Robertson. I'm an aquatic biologist with the River Studies program at Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. And today my talk is about a current project that is still underway looking at potential impacts to the mussel community structure from a new wastewater discharge in the upper Sabine River, Texas. So just to provide a brief background on freshwater mussels in Texas, we currently have 52 species of mussels in the state. 15 species are currently listed as state threatened. 1 species is state and federally endangered. But in addition, we have 10 other species that are under consideration for federal listing. So because of these recent listings and potential listings, we've been working with federal and state agencies as well as private landowners to help come up with some conservation measures for freshwater mussels in the state to hopefully reduce, mitigate, or eliminate impacts to these species. While there are many factors that have been attributed to the decline in freshwater mussels throughout the United States, it seems that most of these studies for the assessments of declines in freshwater mussels in Texas focus on habitat alterations, more specifically alterations to the flow regime from large dam constructions and hydropower and land use changes, but little effort has focused on the role of poor water quality on mussel declines in the states, and specifically the role of wastewater discharges into our rivers. And while there are many contaminants that are associated with wastewater discharges that could impact freshwater mussel communities, ammonia is probably one of the most common ones, and as studies have shown is highly toxic to freshwater mussels. In 2013, EPA significantly revised their water quality criteria for ammonia when they included freshwater mussels in those assessments. Unfortunately, in Texas, our Texas Commission on Environmental Quality has not updated the ammonia water quality standards for our state based on these 2013 EPA criteria yet. So new wastewater and existing wastewater discharges in our state are at a much higher level for ammonia. So an example in the discrepancy between Texas ammonia criteria and EPA criteria, we have this brand new industrial discharge that was recently permitted and began discharging in 2019. And this is a poultry processing facility that's permitted to discharge 2.18 million gallons per day at a limit of 3.94 milligrams per liter of ammonia. And so just for comparison, I have the 2013 EPA criteria here, where the acute criteria is 17 milligrams per liter, which we are below that, but for the chronic level at 1.9, we are over double that limit, which the EPA recommends that these limits not be exceeded more than 1 in 3 years on average, where theoretically this almost double the chronic EPA criteria could be happening every day. And so this represents a potential problem for freshwater mussels in the upper Sabine River. So given this brand new wastewater discharge in the upper Sabine River, which is relatively unimpacted and contains a diverse and abundant mussel assemblage, this provided a good opportunity to kind of assess any potential impacts to the mussel community in this Reacher River that as a result of this wastewater discharge. And we plan on doing this several ways. One is looking at monitoring the mussel community structure in upstream control reaches and downstream impacted reaches using qualitative time searches. We're also going to monitor mussel demographic changes in upstream and downstream sites using mark recapture. We're going to be utilizing silos to directly assess mussel growth and survival, and also monitoring surface water and pore water quality throughout the reaches as well as at our mussel sampling sites. So just to provide a brief overview of our study area, this is the Sabine River, the upper Sabine River, so upstream of Toledo Bend Reservoir, located in northeast Texas. Texas Parks and Wildlife, we have a designated mussel sanctuary below this FM14 road here because of the abundance and diversity of mussels in this section of river. 32 species of mussels are known from the Sabine River Basin. 5 of these species are state listed and 2 of them are currently being proposed for federal listing. And so for our study, we have this split out into 1 kilometer reaches. So we have two 1 kilometer reaches upstream of the discharge as control sites and two 1 kilometer reaches downstream as impacted sites. So getting into our methods here, for our community structure sampling, we're using a stratified random sampling design approach where our sampling sites are stratified by substrate and edge versus mid-channel. And so each site is 150 square meters where we're doing 10 of them per reach. So with 2 upstream and 2 downstream reaches, that's 40 samples per sampling event, so per year. And to conduct the sampling within those sites, we're doing 4 one-person-hour search periods per sample. So here's our substrate map that we developed for our study area. As you can see, the site is predominantly sand, but there are large patches of large rock, gravel, and clay that are distributed throughout the study reach. And we use this substrate map, that way we can sample substrates in equal proportions for each of the reaches to kind of eliminate any differences in community structure because of differences in sampling method or sampling areas. To develop the substrate maps, we use recreational grade side scan sonar to scan the whole site and to basically polygon areas of different habitat patches. So on the left you can see kind of the rough, coarse, large rock, gravel substrates in a riffle, and then on the right image you can kind of see the dune forms from sand on a river bottom right there. For our mark recapture sampling methodology, we use the community level sampling that we discussed before to pick sites to establish a mark recapture site. So areas that had high abundance and diversities of mussels were chosen for mark recapture sites. And for this, we're using a robust design mark recapture methodology. So we're conducting our primary period yearly and secondary periods, which are 3 consecutive times at 24-hour intervals per site per year. And so the initial sampling at each of our mark recapture sites consists of a time search for initial detection and recaptures, and then we follow that up by a time search period with the pit tag reader, since we are pit tagging all of these mussels. And so our target species for mark recapture are essentially all of our state listed species, so Texas pigtoe, Louisiana pigtoe, Texas hill splitter, sandbank pocketbook, and Ouachita Creek shell, as well as some common species that have various life history strategies such as deer toe, pistol grip, and yellow sand shell. So for the mussel silo component of this study, we'll be partnering with Texas A&M University, who will be producing the juvenile mussels for this silo study, and we'll be looking at producing juveniles of Texas pigtoe or maybe even sandbank pocketbook, where we'll put the juveniles in the silos in upstream control sites as well as downstream impacted sites to assess mussel growth and survival differences between the two areas. For the water quality monitoring component of this study, we'll be monitoring water quality quarterly in each of the 4 study reaches. So that includes 24-hour continuous water quality sonde deployments, as well as surface water grabs and pore water grab samples that will be analyzed for nutrient parameters. We're also collecting pore water samples at each of our mussel sampling locations, and as well as deploying pressure transducers within our mark recapture sites and temperature loggers as well. So here's just an example of our water quality team taking instantaneous water quality as well as some pore water samples at our study site. While this project is currently still ongoing, I do have some preliminary results that I can share from our sampling to date. So for our mussel community samplings, unfortunately, we've only been able to complete 1 year of mussel community sampling. We had high water back in 2018, and COVID obviously precluded sampling in 2020. But in 2019, we got out and were able to do 33 of the 40 sites for mussel community sampling, and we collected a total of almost 6,000 mussels, represented by 20 species and 4 of the 5 state listed species. So just to break down those numbers between our upstream control sites and our downstream impacted sites, even though we did sample less sites downstream, the total abundances would have been pretty much very similar, as well as the species compositions are relatively similar. And we collected, the state listed species were found in both the upstream and downstream reaches. So here we just have some photos of our community sampling efforts during this study. So here's some examples of our state listed species that we collected during our community sampling. We have sandbank pocketbook and Texas hill splitter, as well as Texas pigtoe and Louisiana pigtoe. So we were able to establish 2 marker capture sites, so one upstream and one downstream site. In our upstream site, we've tagged almost 1,100 mussels and 4 state listed species. And in our downstream site, we only have 140 mussels tagged with 2 of our state listed species to date. So here's just an example of a group of our tagged mussels. So on one valve, a pit tag is initially super glued and then covered with a water well epoxy to protect the pit tag. And then on the opposite valve, they get a coated vinyl tag that is super glued to the shell. So because water quality sampling is a little less stringent than mussel sampling, we have been able to conduct more water quality sampling events during this study period. So we have 5 sampling events that have occurred so far. So here we have a summary of the pore water ammonia samples that we've collected to date in the study. The top yellow line represents their permitted ammonia levels, and the bottom red line represents the EPA chronic criteria. So as you can see, the majority of the samples are below both of these criteria. However, there are some samples that exceed at least one or both of these limits. So because this project is still ongoing, we do plan on continuing mussel community sampling, as well as establishing additional mark recapture sites and water quality sampling. So we're hoping to continue this for at least the next 2 years. We're also looking to develop ammonia LC50 criteria for Texas mussel species that we can apply to this project. And the overall hope is that this work can help inform future wastewater permit limits in Texas that will consider freshwater mussels when they're issued. So this work and this project wouldn't have been possible without the help from a lot of folks here that are acknowledged here. So I just want to thank them for all their contributions and help in the field with this study. And thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me at the email below. Thank you.